Hello, Internet Wanderer. Let me regale you on a tale of a game that I really like. Defense of the Ancients, otherwise known as Dota, the quintessential MOBA, a genre that emphasizes strategy and tactics, much like chess. Dota is also the game that prides itself in its modding history, since the game itself has a long history with custom, community-made content, much like chess. That's a lie. Valve, being the company behind Dota 2, highly encourages their players to make their own custom content with Valve games. There's an entire tab in the main menu of Dota 2 that's purely for custom games and content. Some of it is amazing, and some of it is, questionable. This isn't exclusive to Dota, as all of Valve games have a rich history of modding and custom content. Counter-Strike, Portal, Team Fortress 2 all have deep roots in player-made modification. But I won't get into all of that. I've already made a video covering all of Valve's games and their history. Dota itself is a mod of Warcraft 3, a real-time strategy game made by Blizzard, and its earliest versions date back to 2003. Fast forward an entire childhood and Dota is one of the biggest games in the MOBA genre. It still holds the biggest prize pool in gaming history and, in my opinion, has some of the most unique and creative game designs and mechanics in any competitive video game out there. And amidst all of this prospering that the main game Dota has, any spin-offs of the Dota brand can't exactly claim the same thing. Dota is successful, very successful, but hot damn, the 3 spin-offs that it has range from could have been great, could have been better, and coulda, woulda, shoulda never happened, in that order. That can be a topic for another video, but today I want to cover one of these spin-offs, the one that had potential, the one that was a pioneer of an entirely new gaming genre, and a game that, in my opinion, is the worst case of Valve abandoning one of their games. And given that it's Dota 2's 11th birthday not too long ago, and its biggest tournament is coming up soon, and their totally secret upcoming game that nobody knows about, wink wink, I thought I'd celebrate by bringing up a game that's related to Dota that personally I wish had a second chance. If I can accomplish anything in this video, it's the hope that I can convince you, dear Internet Wanderer, to give this game that I'm talking about a try. And even if I can't do that, I'll cry, just you learning about this game's story and history is good enough for me. I'll even throw a guide towards the end if you're interested. I'm talking about the auto battler genre and the video game Dota Underlords. Hello, Internet Wanderer. My name is Argonax. I make video reviews, essays, commentaries, and shorts. I hope you enjoy this video enough to do the YouTube things. I've been thinking that maybe I'll start live streaming here on YouTube. It seems like a good way to keep in touch with everybody who subscribed to me. But anyway, enough self-plugging. Let's get back to the video. Dota Underlords is the topic of this video, which will be split into 2 sections. The first being the history and the story of auto battlers and underlords, and the second being a guide for Dota Underlords. Here's a timestamp to fast forward to if you just want to look at the guide section of the video. Phew! Now that all of those meta slaves are gone, before we talk about Dota Underlords, I need to explain to the kids in the audience what exactly an auto battler is. Also known as auto chess, it was originally a mod of Dota 2 that really gained popularity in early 2019. Made by a small team that would later go by the name of Drodo Studios. Drodo stated that their 2 biggest inspirations for the auto chess genre was Mahjong and a Warcraft 3 custom game that went by the name of Pokemon Defense. Broadly speaking, all auto battlers play the same. The player places down units on a chess-like board, and then, after a preparation period, you get to fight an enemy team without any direct input from the player once combat has started. From a purely mechanical gameplay sense, auto battlers are a mix of many types of games and genres. It has the heroes from Dota, who all retain at least one core ability from the main game. The board is that of chess. You form your team or crew via a slot machine style of store. The player even uses the in-game gold to re-roll the heroes available, spending more money trying to look for the specific unit they're looking for. Units will typically have different alliances, synergies, and individual strengths that complement each other or can be used to counter the enemy teams. I won't get into too much detail about the nitty-gritty about the gameplay aspects. That's what the guide section of the video is for, but at least I want to show you how deep this game can be. I'll give an example of one of the various strategies in this game. Let's say you have a knight-centric alliance, meaning your units are strongest when they're close together and in head-to-head engagements. Knights serve as great frontline units, allowing you to build a backline of DPS squishy units to shore up the lack of damage. But now, your crew is heavily countered by being flanked from behind, something the Assassin Alliance is specifically built around. You can handily beat the other players by bulldozing over them, except one of the players in your game is an Assassin player, and he handily beats your crew, because at the beginning of the round, assassins will always jump to your backline, killing all of these squishies and causing the formation of your knights to fall apart, thus losing a lot of the benefits of their alliance. What do you do? One thing you could do is place one of your tankiest knights in the back, next to the squishies, and add a gap in the formation of your front line. This allows your crew to still easily beat the other players, since the gap in the front line will allow the one tanky knight in the back to catch up with the rest of the knights, thus allowing your team to still have a wall of beefcakes. But should you fight the one assassin player, the one knight in the back can intercept these assassins, hold them off long enough for your squishies to kill these assassins, and buying time for the other knights to reform their formation in the back of the board. This is just one of the countless strategies the player can do when making and positioning their crew. Story. Listen, this game is a spin-off of a MOBA that started off as a mod for an RTS game. Seriously, that's like 3 layers of who gives a fuck. The fact that there's a story is surprising to say the least. This game is set in the crime-riddled city of Whitespire, ruled by Mama Eve.
Mama Eve wills it so. Powerful and feared in equal measure, Eve has a stranglehold. Oh my god, they killed her. Okay. Whitespire, a smuggler's paradise with a power vacuum.
Who is now dead. Now with a power vacuum, all the would-be successors, the Underlords, are fighting for supremacy, hiring the heroes of Dota to do their dirty work. There's a bunch of extra lore, fluff, text, it's scattered all over the game and item descriptions like it's a FromSoft game wannabe. But the lore, much like your Instagram stories and Twitter posts, no one actually gives a fuck. All these different elements combine together to form this one-of-a-kind game that could appeal to various different niches in the gaming world. MOBA players, trading card players, tower defense players, those weirdos who play Cookie Clicker, and literally any game that uses turn-based combat and gameplay. The auto-battler genre exploded in the Dota 2 arcade tab, causing one of the biggest influxes in player counts ever. Millions of players came to play, many of which have never even played Dota in their lives. People installing Dota just to play a custom game, in a funny way mimicking how people used to play the original Dota back in the old days of being a mod for Warcraft 3. I actually remember I had dozens of real-life friends completely addicted to Dota 1 and never once playing any other aspect of Warcraft 3. History really does repeat itself, doesn't it? This genre is great for those who want a game that can challenge them strategically without the burden of Twitch reflexes. At least, that's what I tell myself. It helps lessen the anguish of knowing that every day we edge ever closer to the grave. In reality, I just can't hit those 360 no-scopes like I used to, so I play these old man games instead. Auto-battlers are also a great genre to play on your second monitor while you do something else. As of today, the original Dota auto chess in the Dota 2 arcade tab has 10 million subscribers, and even today still sees a lot of people coming into Dota just to play this custom game. Various other companies, after seeing the success of this breakout hit, made their own versions of the game. Mobile Legends has Magic Chess, Riot Games has Teamfight Tactics, which marks the 3rd time Riot has shafted something that came from a Valve game, and Blizzard has non-existent goodwill in its community. I mean Hearthstone Battlegrounds. auto battlers really took off in 2019 and 2020. They have, however, lessened in popularity, but don't let that discourage you. These games still have a good player base, and the communities invested in these games are here for the long haul. Valve actually reached out and tried to hire the people that made the original mod, DOTA Studios. This is a classic Valve strategy. They'll reach out and hire talented modders and creators, enabling those creators to produce games of unparalleled quality. That's what they did with Counter-Strike and Team Fortress, and they were hoping it would happen again with Auto Chess. But, surprisingly, DOTA Studios declined their offer, saying that they wanted to make their own game, which is now called Auto Chess, available on the Epic Game Store. Yikes. But DOTA still gave their full blessing for Valve to make their own game, and even consulted with them during the creation process. Valve, undeterred, went ahead and made their own version, and that version is now called DOTA Underlords. DOTA Underlords is Valve's official entry into the auto battler genre. It was first announced in May of 2019, with an early access later in June of the same year. Underlords is also Valve's first attempt at mobile games. I would show you footage of me playing on my phone, but playing a video game on my phone is a form of torture that I am not willing to subject myself to. The game is fully cross-playable with both mobile and PC players, and as development continued, it got features like a replay system, ranked matchmaking, daily challenges, rewards, and even a battle pass. Woohoo! Underlords was massive on launch. It had well over 1.5 million downloads on the first day, with a record concurrent player count of over 200,000. This is the main reason that I titled the video the way that I did, Valve's shortest lived game. Valve doesn't have a lot of overt failures when it comes to their game releases. There are, however, 5 notable exceptions: Ricochet, Counter-Strike Condition Zero, Alien Swarm, Artifact, and Underlords. Artifact was Dota's first spin-off, with it being a trading card game, and it being easily the highest profile flop Valve has ever had. Take a look at this reaction trailer. And all these other games barely scrape the notion of having a player count at any point of their history. None of these games had any real community or support. Even Artifact's max player count is only a third of what Underlords was. And the drop-off of Artifact's player count was substantially faster than Underlords. That's why I titled the video the way that I did. Because while you could argue that Underlords is technically dead or dying, none of these other Valve games ever truly lived. Underlords, at the very least, at one point in its history, was thriving. I could be wrong here, but I remember DOTA Underlords being the first time Valve set up a community Discord, and you may not believe this, actively communicated and even interacted with the community on a regular basis. This must have been a more enlightened time. The official Discord doesn't really exist anymore. From what I can remember, the people in charge of Underlord became increasingly frustrated with Valve's passivity and eventually just discontinued work on all things Underlord related. The last major update for DOTA Underlords was in August of 2020. For those in the audience keeping track of the dates, DOTA Underlords was officially released in February of 2020. The last game update was in August that year. That is 6 months of official support. If you want to be generous and include the early access period, that's 14 months. If that doesn't describe a game being short-lived, I don't know what does. People stuck around for a while, but eventually it wasn't enough. And as the years went by, that player count just got lower and lower. Granted, there's still a lot of people playing this game on mobile that I cannot account for. Steam charts doesn't really keep track of those mobile players. But regardless, the player count is a shadow of its former self. That paints a bleak picture, wouldn't you say? Why would I try a game that has a low player count and a history that messy? Why am I making this video? Maybe there's no deeper meaning or message other than, yeah, I really like this game and it's a damn shame what happened to it. This isn't really related to DOTA Underlords, but Team Fortress 2 just had its Fix TF2 movement not too long ago. The whole point of the movement was to get Valve's attention to try to fix their game and give it some TLC. I even covered the movement as it happened, and I saw all sorts of statements like TF2 is Valve's most neglected game, how could they allow such a well-received game like TF2 wither away like this? And while all these criticisms are absolutely correct, we should hold Valve responsible and accountable for how they treated Team Fortress 2, and I fully supported the community while TF2 was happening. I could never fully agree with the whole most neglected game title, because I knew that there was a game that Valve neglected far worse than TF2. And maybe this is all just a desperate attempt by someone who fancies themselves a microscopic celebrity / influencer and hopes that by making this video, I can inform you on a game that I consider great, and maybe, hopefully, convince some of you to give this game a try. This marks the end of the history / story part of the video. If you don't want to learn anything about the guide, you can click off here, but I do hope that, if nothing else, I was able to tell you the tale of a game that I love. A game that, had things gone a little differently, could have been amazing. A game that I truly consider a gem, and how I wish it could have been better. But enough of that sappy shit. You're here to win, aren't you? Welcome to the guide section of the video. Was the rest of the video too boring for you? Did you just click that timestamp just to fast forward here? You just want to win the video game and not bother learning some history? Ugh. Zoomer. Alright, Poindexter, shut up, sit down, and listen. Now, I'm gonna explain to you how exactly one plays an auto-battler. For the most part, all auto-battlers have the same goals and controls. So while I'll be teaching you the intrinsics and mechanics of Dota Underlords, most of the info that I'm gonna be talking about here can still be used in other auto-battlers. Apologies if a lot of these clips have the in-game audio muted. You see, auto-battlers are the perfect game to play while watching something else on your second screen.
Oh, my shoulder.
You open the game, queue up, and then when you load into the match with 7 other players. Once the game begins, you choose your starting team. Units can be bought with gold, and you start off with 5. Gold can be used for 3 things: buying more units, re-rolling the shop, and leveling up. Levels equals how many units you can have on your crew. At the beginning of the game, you start at level 3. So you open up the shop and buy your starting units. All units have at least 2 alliances. Think of them as team buffs. And if you have enough of a certain alliance and reach those thresholds required for the alliance to work, you gain the buff. You set your units on the board, I'll talk about positioning later in the video, and after the preparation time is finished, you face off against a random enemy team. From that point, you just sit and watch your units whack each other to death. You, the player, cannot influence the battle in any direct way. All units have unique abilities, some that are passive and always on, while others require mana, which they gain by dealing damage or receiving damage. You can see it by the blue bar underneath their health. That moving white line underneath their health is the cooldown indicator for their abilities. And knowing what individual spell does can heavily affect the outcome of a round. There's obviously too many spells for me to list, but I will highlight a bunch of standout ones later in the video. If you win the round, great. If you lose, that's fine. Losing a round means you can reroll for free. As you can see, I just lost, and that's because my current crew doesn't have any alliances right now. With round 2 underway, the shop reopens, and then I got lucky, spotting 2 Kunkas in the store. You see, all the units in the game are divided into tiers and stars. Tiers dictates the unit's cost and overall quality. A tier 1 enchantress isn't exactly going to stand a chance against tier 3 Lycan. And all units will start off at 1 stars, and can be upgraded by having multiple of the same copies of that hero. In this example I just showed, I had Kunkka, and then I got lucky with a store providing me with 2 more. I buy them up, and then suddenly my Kunkka is now a 2-star, meaning all of his stats are vastly improved as well as the effectiveness of his abilities. Later in the game, if you can get 3 2-star Kunkas, he will become a 3-star Kunkka. But getting 3-star units is no easy feat. Thanks to me losing that first round, I was able to get the free reroll, and by doing so it allowed me to pick up a Bat Rider, thus giving me the Troll Alliance bonus, providing my entire team with attack speed. Sure, I might have lost the first round, but this big power spike of having a 2-star Kunkka and a Troll Alliance will basically ensure my victory for the next couple of rounds. All players start with 100 health, and they take damage every time they lose a round. There's a bunch of calculations that go into how much damage the player takes, but for every unit left standing on the enemy team is how much damage you are going to take. There is no way to gain player health back, so any health loss is permanent. However, this early on, don't feel too bad if you lose a round, or 2, or 7. After winning round 2, I was able to upgrade my Bat Rider into a 2-star as well. Feeling nice and secured, I think I'll have time to talk about money. Gold! You earn gold at the end of every round, regardless if you win or lose. And if you start winning or losing in a row, you start racking up a spree. You'll earn a big gold injection if you can complete that spree, with winning sprees obviously providing more gold. Consult this table for more. You also earn this thing called gold interest. For every 10 gold you have in your bank, you gain a bonus 1 to a maximum of 3. It's for this reason alone that a lot of people like to keep their gold at around 30. 3 bonus gold is not a lot, but it can rack up as time goes on. After a certain amount of rounds, the players are going to be presented with a selection of items. These items can be placed in your units, further augmenting them. Items are separated into tiers, just like units, with the higher tiers granting bigger bonuses and stats. Some items complement certain alliances and units better than others. I'll go into more detail about which items benefit which build the most in the later part of the video, but just know that some of these things can become overpowered really quick, especially in the later rounds. And speaking of things that are overpowered, tier 1, 2, and 3 units all have special effects when they become 3-star units. Let's take Pudge for example, who I just got. Pudge by himself is a very tanky, durable frontliner, but if you are able to upgrade him to a 3-star unit, every time a unit dies around him, Pudge gains a permanent health bonus until the end of the round, with Pudge also gradually becoming bigger and bigger for every kill that happens around him. Sometimes this can get pretty ridiculous. Or take Kunkka for example. His 3-star effect causes his basic attacks to hit the entire enemy team, damaging them all with huge cleave damage. But getting 3-star units requires a ton of space. You're gonna have to upgrade your 1-star into a 2-star, and then to get the 3-star you're gonna need 3 2-stars. That's 9 copies of the same hero, and I hope you're good at managing space. And speaking of space, this little bar right here at the bottom is called your bench. This is where you keep all of your unused heroes. And especially when you're trying to balance out alliance bonuses and trying to upgrade your units, too often you're gonna find your bench completely filled up while trying to upgrade multiple units at the same time and just not having enough slots to upgrade to those juicy 3-stars. But sometimes, even if you do have the space, upgrading your units can be a bit of a challenge because all players share the same pool of units available. For example, let's say you're trying to upgrade your Batrider into a 3-star Batrider. But when you check the scoreboard, you notice that there's a bunch of other players who are also trying to build Batriders. The more a unit is contested, the harder it is to upgrade them. A smart player will typically observe what everyone else is building and then proceed to build units and alliances that are uncontested by the other players. And keep in mind, there's only a limited amount of units. For example, any tier 1 unit only has 20 copies in the store. Here's a table in case you're interested. So just know that even if you can manage your bench perfectly, if the unit, alliance, or build you're going for is heavily contested, you might find it well to shift into a different build or unit. But all of that hinges on how well you can manage your gold. Like I said earlier, gold only has 3 uses, and earning gold is rather easy. However, one thing that's easier than gaining gold is losing it. I know, those 3-star units are great, but don't bankrupt yourself by re-rolling 10 times just to find the one unit you were looking for. You can spend your gold by buying levels early on in order to get the numbers advantage. It costs 5 gold to buy a chunk of XP, and the higher levels obviously require more gold and XP. But don't level up too quickly. That's going to come at the cost of your individual units being weaker. And also, leveling up too quickly can make finding 3-stars a lot more difficult, since the higher your level, the more units become available in the shop. And I don't mean as in the shop gets more slots, no. It's just that in those 5 slots in the shop, they're going to be offering more and more units. So the chances of finding your specific unit becomes less and less likely as you keep leveling up. Here's a table of percentages of what units you can get per level. So as you can see, leveling in of itself is not a bad thing. But say you're trying to get your tier 1 unit into a 3-star. At level 3, your odds of finding other tier 1 units is at a 55%. But let's say you blitzed into level 5. Now your chances of finding those 1-star units has dropped to a 35%. You have to achieve a delicate balance when it comes to your gold between buying units, buying levels, and when not to re-roll the shop, lest you run out of gold, which I am guilty of many many times because I only need one more goddamn unit to finish this stupid 3-star and it's not giving it to me and I've spent all my goddamn gold. The astute among you will wonder, what does the Underlord word mean in the title of the game? Well, you see, the gimmick of this auto battler is that at round 10, all players get to choose one of the 4 Underlords to add to their teams. The Underlords are strong commander units that provide various buffs and abilities to aid their team. They all specialize in different things, but they are always powerful. And the 4 Underlords are Jewel, the Walrus Gangster, Hogbin, a Fairy Arsonist, an Essex, a Succubus that makes me act up, and Enno, who would make me act up if I was a degenerate. And all Underlords have 2 variants of their abilities. For example, Hogbin is the go-to damage Underlord. He's all about fire and explosions. His passive makes it that his basic attacks sets his enemies on fire. Both versions retain this passive ability. Where they differ is in the basic ability and the ultimate. Version 1 has him firing a cannon for big damage as his basic ability, and his ultimate rains bombs from the sky. Version 2 has the same cannon ability, but it deals less damage, but this time it stuns enemies caught in the blast. And his new ultimate provides his entire team with a huge attack speed buff. All Underlords have a version 1 and 2. And you cannot choose which version of the Underlord you're gonna get in the round. This encourages the player to diversify their gameplay every match. I'm not going to go into too much detail about each Underlord. I'm going to highlight them more in the Alliance section of the video. I already explained what Hogbin does. TLDR is, Jewel is a frontline tank, amazing at soaking damage and providing damage reduction and healing for the team. An Essex is a demon summoner, and best benefits those types of teams. She can give heals or massive damage buffs to her team and can either summon a powerful demon or take over a member of the enemy team as your own. And finally, Enno, a slippery little bastard, bouncing around the map, spraying his poison everywhere and stealing your wallet and leaving you dead in an alleyway. Eventually, players will start losing all of their health and start getting kicked out. If there is an odd number of players left in the game will make a clone of a random player for the odd player out to face. And as more and more players get kicked out, you will earn points based off how many rounds you were able to last and the closer you were to first place by the end of the game. As you can see, I did very well. While the game is built around the idea of randomness, it isn't. Well, yes, hypothetically, you could roll every unit that you weren't looking for, and hypothetically, you could never get a 2-star on your team. But hypothetically, I could also be sleeping with your mom. That's not a hypothetical. The skill comes from minimizing the randomness intrinsic to the game. No matter how random you might perceive the game or the mechanics or whatever have you, everything in Dota Underlords can be alleviated with proper positioning, gold management, planning, or tactics. Honestly, it's very satisfying to know that you were able to control that randomness and make it work to your favor. Anyway, you got all that? No? Well, too bad. I'm gonna keep going. If you want to win this game, I mean truly win this game, you need to understand the one mechanic that truly brings you over that finish line. And that thing is the alliances and the units of the game itself. Let's talk about... In this section, I'm going to be describing each alliance, and assisting me in that will be this alliance triangle alignment thingy that I made. It shows all the alliances in the game and, in my opinion, where they best fit the categories of damage, tank, and utility. Also, special shout out and thanks to Gunicon for allowing me to use his gameplay as footage for my video. As you can see by the runtime of this video, a lot of footage was required in order to properly demonstrate all of the alliances and builds and such, and I didn't have all of the footage, but fortunately his channel did. I'll put his channel in the description below. His gameplay proved massively helpful for me. Thank you. Now, all alliances have... Jesus Christ. All alliances have thresholds in order for the alliance bonus to activate. For example, for Knights, it's a 6-member alliance, but it's divided into 3 thresholds, each one requiring 2 members. Whereas the Swordsmen is also a 6-member alliance, but it only has 2 thresholds, requiring 3. I'll also be describing how each alliances have their pros, their cons, which items works best for them, and any other tips that may prove useful. And as well, if the alliance is a primary or a supporting alliance. And finally, I will also highlight one standout member in each alliance. And as you can see, there are a ton of alliances, and since I cover each and every single one, this next segment of the video is gonna take a while. Literally 2/3 of this entire video's runtime is just me talking about the alliances. So I don't blame you if you don't want to watch this entire next segment. I will be including timestamps in the video description below if you just want to hop between which alliance you want to know about, but if you decide to watch the whole thing, I will be greatly appreciative of that, as this next segment of the video took a lot out of me to edit. Small spoiler, I intended this entire video to only be about 20 minutes. Yeah, that didn't end up happening. So, without any further ado, let's start this off by talking about the one right up here at the top. The Void Alliance is very simple. They're all about dealing maximum health damage. Their whole point is to hard counter super tanky alliances like the Warriors, Tanks, and Knights. And the alliance benefits your entire team, not just Void units. Despite being a damage-oriented alliance, it is very much a supporting alliance. Its downside, however, is that it's a very late-game alliance. The majority of its units are tier 4 and above, and it's also very situational. The alliance also has strong overlap with assassins, seeing as 2 of its members are assassins. As for items, if you really want to double down on the max health damage, Caden's Blade stacks with this alliance. Slap it into a high attack speed hero like Drow Ranger, Bat Rider, or Troll Warlord, and just watch as the enemy tanks melt faster than they did before. And for the standout unit, Spectre, a tier 3 demon void unit. Easily the most broken unit in the game in my opinion. The moment that her spell activates and she gets her demon buff, she skyrockets in the damage graph. She can shred through enemy backlines like it's nobody's business. I suspect some underpaid Valve janitor must have added an extra 0 in her damage, because she can easily carry entire games by herself. So the moment that you start getting tier 3 units and you notice that no one else is building Spectre, you better start hogging her because she can guarantee you a top 3 spot in every game most of the time. Next, Assassins can be played as a primary or a supporting alliance. These are sneaky little shits capable of wiping out entire teams in seconds. Pros: they have incredibly high burst damage, and they have strong overlap with the aforementioned Void and Swordsman alliances. And as well, they counter healing. Cons: if you're focusing on assassins, they can be countered by proper positioning and crowd control. A smart player will place their strong units in the back, allowing them to face the assassins head on. Items: just give them anything that gives them more damage, honestly. Desolator, Silver Edge, Maelstroms, Divine Rapiers, they're all good. Tips: if you're playing them as a primary alliance, you're probably going to want to get Jewel to tank for your team. And be aware of enemy positionings. It isn't stated in the alliance, but all assassins will teleport to the opposite end of the board. This is both their strength and weakness, given that they can both easily be countered, but if not, they can destroy enemy backlines. And for their standout unit, Slark, a tier 3 scaled assassin. He has the lowest DPS among all the assassins, but allow him to free hit just for a few seconds and he quickly becomes one of the strongest units in the game. His ability, Essence Shift, allows him to steal the stats of whoever he's hitting, ever increasing the DPS of his attacks. His 3-star effect makes him even harder to lock down. Too often, I fight enemy Slarks and my dumbass crew kills his entire team but saves him for last. And by that point, his damage and attack speed numbers have reached ludicrous numbers. You can counter him with proper positioning just like all assassins, and if you have high enough burst damage, you can also kill him before the stupid fish becomes a problem. Keeping on theme with the alliances that have overlap with the assassins, Swordsmen, which can also be played as a primary or a supporting alliance. Not gonna lie, this is a difficult alliance to make work, but if you can manage it, it's very powerful. Their whole gimmick is that swordsmen deal more damage the more enemies surround them. Pros: very high damage, and they counter flanking builds or summoning builds. They also do very well against melee focused lineups, who like to wrap their position around the swordsman. Cons: the thresholds for the alliance is unappealing, making it hard to maximize the alliance to its fullest, and they're also countered by range builds. Items: this is a hackable alliance, meaning there's a tier 3 item that you can slap onto a non-swordsman hero to turn them into a swordsman. This alleviates the threshold problem a little bit, if you are lucky. And durability items are great since the alliance can already deal enough damage as is. They just need to survive long enough being surrounded and outnumbered. Tips: it's a generally good idea to spread the swordsmen apart, ensuring each one fights at least 2 or more enemies and gives them all that damage buff. As for the Underlord, any of them can work. And for the standout unit, Sven, a tier 4 rogue knight swordsman, which is also his in-lore title. He is just an absolute beefcake of a unit. Given that he's a tier 4 unit, most of the time you're only really gonna upgrade him into a 2-star unit. Hell, I don't think I've ever even seen a 3-star Sven before. Correction, Gunicon has a video where he has a 3-star Sven and he is a beast. His passive ability is called Cleave. It just deals a shit ton of damage in a big cone every time he swings his sword. And his spell is called God's Strength. It's just a massive damage steroid. So when you combine God's Strength, Cleave, the Swordsman buff, and the Rogue buff, this guy becomes a monster if properly enabled. In regular Dota, Sven can one-shot entire enemy teams if they clump together, and Underlord Sven is no different. Slap the biggest damage item you have on him and watch as the entire enemy team becomes an enemy memory. Now, moving from one side of the triangle to the other, I want to cover one of the tank alliances. Knights can be played as a primary or supporting alliance. It's one of the OG vanilla tank factions. They're simple, but they get the job done. Pros: they have the highest resistance stat in the game, and they can easily bulldoze enemy teams. It has a simple build-up, and they're great for beginners. It is a 6-member alliance, but honestly, at 4 members, the alliance is plenty strong. Cons: by itself, Knights have low damage. Sure, they have members like Luna, Chaos Knight, and Sven, but even these Knights need a good amount of enabling via items or supporting alliances to deal meaningful damage. Knights are also very susceptible to anything that would split their attention, so Assassins can counter them pretty handily, or honestly anything that can break up their positioning. Savages can also rack enough damage to overcome their resistances. And the Void Alliance doesn't care about resistances. As for items, anything can work. You can slap in more items to bolster their defenses or give them damage to shore up for their lack of it. It really just depends on what you're fighting against. Tips: Knights have a lot of overlap with other alliances. If you pick up a Dazzle, you can naturally get both the Troll and the Healer alliances. Sometimes picking up Assassins or Hunters can also help with the lack of damage. And this isn't stated anywhere, but Knights like to be next to each other, and if possible, they will move nearby to an adjacent Knight just to ensure that all of them get the bonus. As for the Underlord, I would recommend Hogbin, an S6, or NO. You don't really need Jewel since you already have more than enough tanking capabilities. And for the standout unit, Chaos Knight, a tier 2 Demon Knight. He's a very solid unit, very simplistic, but honestly that's all you need. His damage is quite high thanks to being a demon, and his 3-star effect means that all Knights will get the full resistance even if they aren't next to each other. You will typically be using him to lead the Knights, dealing high damage and tanking a lot of it as well. His spell is very straightforward. He stuns and deals damage to an enemy for a random duration. He's like a jack of all trades. His damage is good, tanking is good, his CC is good, but not the best in any one category. Not really much else to say. I do, however, have a lot to say about this next alliance, because it is my personal favorite. Brawnies. In my opinion, it can only be played as a primary alliance. I love seeing their health bars getting bigger and bigger. Oh god, yes. Don't let the fact that it's only a 4-unit alliance trick you. This is one of the hardest carrying alliances out there. I will force this build whenever I have the faintest excuse to do so. How it works is simple. For every kill a Brawny gets, they get more health. Simple and straightforward. So, pros: it is the Snowball Alliance. It can quickly become one of the hardest alliances to fight if they get a good early game. Infinite scaling HP, and all of the units deal high damage on their own, even without supporting alliances. I wouldn't say that they counter summoners, but rather they enjoy fighting summoners. The more summoners there are in the game just means that the Brawny Alliance will just become even harder to kill in the late game. Cons: you need to dedicate this build from the start, ideally from round 1 or 2. The later you get this alliance going, the worse the build gets. And as well, any kills made by non-Brawny units just kind of feel bad. Don't be surprised if you mix Assassins and Brawnies and wonder why your supposed tanky boys crumple like paper because they have no kills. All the Brawny units also don't have any alliance overlap, and they're also countered by the Void Alliance. As for items, same thing with the Knights, anything can really work. Although I do prefer adding more health onto them, because they can already deal decent damage on their own. Special shout out, however, to the Quelling Blade and Maelstrom. They deal bonus damage to summons, and Brawnies love killing summons. As for tips, like I mentioned before, it works best as your primary alliance. Most of the time, I won't even branch out into supporting alliances. I'll just put multiple 2-star copies of the same hero on the board just to maximize the kills the alliance can get. 2 2-star Juggernauts or 2 2-star Bristlebacks is a lot of damage. I will say, however, the Dragon Alliance bonus for Snapfire is very powerful, so if you can pick up a Puck or another Dragon, it's worth it most of the time. As for the Underlord, I would recommend named Jewel, because the buffs he can grant are very nice, but the main reason is that he is the least likely to steal kills from the Brawnies. And for their standout unit, Juggernaut, a tier 2 Brawny Swordsman. He deals very high damage thanks to his spin, probably the most damaging spell among all the tier 2 units. And if you have the Swordsman alliance and Juggernaut just happens to be surrounded, watch as he proceeds to reenact Will It Blend as he turns all the surrounding enemies into paste. His spin also makes him immune to magic damage. And finally, his 3-star effect synergizes perfectly with the Brawny alliance. So slapping the biggest HP item on Jug is recommended. Fun fact, Juggernaut's spin activates Quelling Blade, thus making him extremely powerful at clearing summons, especially in the early game. His only weakness, I would say, is that his base health is on the lower end, despite being a Brawny and being named Juggernaut. He does need a fair bit of enabling in order to be really scary. Let's talk utility. My favorite utility alliance, in fact, Brutes, which unsurprisingly is just a supporting alliance. This alliance basically takes a bat to the enemy team's damage knees. This is an awful analogy. They completely gimp the enemy's damage, basically. Pros. They're great for extending rounds. And most Brutes are naturally tanky. It's also one of the easiest alliances to fully build up. As well, each individual unit in the Brute Alliance has some of the best CC or utility spells in the game, with the exception of Lifestealer, who just deals a shit ton of damage. Cons. Due to the nature of their alliance, they like to switch targets a lot, so they're not exactly good for dealing focused damage, and thus they rely on the rest of their team to deal any meaningful damage. Items. This is another hackable alliance, so getting full Brute coverage across the board is actually rather easy. And since Brutes is a supporting alliance, getting tank items, crowd control, or aura items is the best choice. Tips. Just make sure that you have some source of damage. That's all I can emphasize. They mix well with assassins, hunters, swordsmen, you name it. They also do very well with other tanky builds like warriors and knights. Thanks to their damage reduction, eventually the tanks will just overcome and outlast their opponents. As for Underlords, I would recommend an Essex, Enno, or Hogbin. Having Jewel there is just tripling down on the damage reduction, which is a bit overkill in my opinion. And for the standout unit, we have Doom, a tier 4 demon brute. Due to the nature of him being a tier 4 means he's a little tricky to get, but once you get him on the board, Doom's very creatively named spell, Doom, basically turns an enemy into the training dummy. He also has one of the highest base HPs in the game. So, combined with his Brute Alliance, you can just place him in front of your crew and just let him tank. His damage is actually relatively low despite being a demon. All of his damage does come from his spell, but honestly that's all he needs because Doom is just so powerful of an ability, he doesn't really need anything else. It has a relatively long cooldown, but if you can get an Octarine Essence or a Refresher Orb, that just means you can get multiple Dooms going, and that just means you can turn more of the enemy team into vegetables. Is that offensive? Fun fact, Doom's in-lore name is actually Lucifer. On the topic of vegetables, let's go back to the tanky boys and talk about one of the most simple alliances in the game. The simplest alliance in the game. Warriors. They can be played as a primary or a supporting alliance. These guys are more vanilla than vanilla. They're more basic than your girlfriend, and just like your girlfriend, they work. I know for most, these armor numbers don't mean shit, so allow me to tell you. 10 armor is effectively 37.5% damage reduction, while 20 armor is 54% damage reduction. And that's not counting the base armor that all units already start with. So, for pros, they are very, very strong against physical lineups. The armor that they have is no joke, and they also have very strong overlap with the scaled alliance. So, they already are very good against physical lineups, and if you combine that with a scaled alliance, makes them also very durable to magic lineups. These guys are just absolute units. Most of the individual warrior units are also very strong. Just like brutes, they have very powerful crowd control and utility spells. And the team buildup is very simple. Most of the units are tier 1 and tier 2s, so you can get this alliance going from round 1 if you're lucky. But for the cons, very little damage. Probably the lowest damage out of all of the alliances in the game. Lower than knights, and lower than even some of the other supporting alliances. And they can fall off really quickly unless you have something to shore up the lack of damage. And just like the other durable alliances, they're countered by Void and Savages as well. As for items, you can either double down on the tankiness to make your crew completely unkillable, or you can just give them damage items. As for tips, all warrior units have very strong stuns and crowd control abilities. So the only tip that I can honestly give you is just be aware of what each warrior spells do, so you can maximize the benefit of your team. And for the standout unit, Kunkka, a tier 2 human swordsman warrior. Kunkka by himself is adequately beefy, he deals decent damage, but it's his spell, Ghost Ship, that's the star of the show. He summons a ghost ship, and smashes it on top of the enemy team, dealing moderate damage, but stunning them for quite a while. His 3-star effect gives him some nice AoE damage, granting him a cleave attack similar to Sven, but other than that, not much else to say, kinda like the Alliance itself. Warriors have been around from the beginning, and they were designed purposely to be simple, but that doesn't mean they can't work. Oh, and since I forgot to add this, for Underlords, just pick Hogbin or Eno, you're gonna need the damage. American healthcare is a joke. You can get sent to the Shadow Realm just for having lumbago. I love going bankrupt because I stubbed my pinky toe and then I got breast cancer. I don't know where this analogy was going. Healers! Well, they provide healing. Simple. Paired with the right alliances, they can make the durability of your team reach truly ridiculous levels. Cons. Unless you can really ensure that you have a good source of damage, eventually, in the late game, enemy teams will be able to outscale your healing. And assassins and savages are specifically designed to counter healers. Items. If you can get the Paladin Sword, that's a massive buff to the healer team. In fact, if you can get 2 or even more, congratulations, because at that point, your team will probably never die. Any of the other healing items are also really great as well. Mechanism, the Mango Tree, Heart of Tarask is really freaking cool. Tips. All the Underlords except Hogbin have some form of healing. Of course, sometimes you're gonna want Hogbin to make up for the lack of damage on your team, but it really depends on what your strategy will be. Double down on the healing, or shore up your lack of damage. And as well, the Healing Alliance amps all forms of healing, not just the spells of the healer themselves. So if you have sources of lifesteal, or heroes that can regenerate a lot of health, like lifesteal or alchemist, they would benefit a lot from the Healer Alliance. The Healer Alliance also has big overlap with the Shaman and Knight alliances due to their natural buildups. And for the standout unit, Omni Knight, a tier 3 human knight healer. He is the best burst healer in the game, as his heal also acts as a strong damaging spell. His base damage is rather low, and for a knight, he isn't particularly tanky himself, but he gives heals to himself and his team, and his 3-star effect is one of the biggest damage power spikes in the game. You can turn a healing/damaging spell into a healing/damaging nuke. Slap a refresher orb on him and watch as he makes little boy and fat man look like a firecracker, and behold as he skyrockets in the damage graph. Oh, I forgot to mention, this is obviously a supporting alliance, but if you want to make it into your primary alliance, it's really hard to do, but it's really funny if you can pull it off. Do you know what a Harry Potter fan's biggest enemy is? The one thing that any Harry Potter fan shudders when they mention the name. That's right, Scalies. Scaled is a supporting alliance. This faction is purely meant to counter magic damage. However, it doesn't guarantee that you will beat mages and other sources of damage. It just means that your team is a little more durable against all sources of magic, which, by the way, all alliances have at least some form of magic damage. It's just a nice little buff for your team to have. It has good overlap with warriors since 2 of its members are warriors, and most of the time, the first threshold is enough. Maxing it out is just overkill in my opinion. Unless you really want to triple dip into the magic resistance, you can get a Hood of Defiance, Pipe of Insight, a BKB, because you really want to screw over that one mage player in your game, but lose to everybody else. Apologies if I didn't do the standard pros, cons, tips, and items thing. This alliance is just really small and I don't have much to say. Standout unit, Slardar, our tier 1 scaled warrior. He massively helps the warrior alliance by dealing damage. In fact, he is one of the few in that alliance that was specifically meant to deal damage. His spell, Corrosive Haze, massively lowers enemy armor, usually bringing it into the negatives. The spell has a very low cooldown and mana cost, so he can cast this basically all the time, every other second. So depending on the lineup and build, it is perfectly viable to have a Slardar on your team, even if you are not building warriors or scaled. And his 3-star effect just makes his attacks have a bashing stunning effect, aiding even more with the lockdown and damage. Now, for this next segment, I'm going to be clumping 3 alliances together. Reason being, these 3 alliances basically almost always overlap with each other, at least to some capacity. They can be played without the others, but if you wanted to play these alliances optimally, you should pair them together. And those alliances are the Shamans, the Summoners, and the Savages. But first, I'll cover what each alliance does and how they can individually benefit your team. The Shaman Alliance calls a creature to help your team at the start of the round, with the creature becoming more and more powerful at each alliance threshold. At level 1, it's a wolf with crits. Next up, it's a big bird with tornadoes. And finally, it ends with a big-ass dragon. These nuts. The creature also gains powerful abilities based off what shamans are on your team. For example, if you have a Nature's Prophet on your team, he grants the creature a spell that when activated, blasts all enemies with lightning. Another example, Magus. When you have him on your Shaman team, he grants a passive ability to the creature, giving it a chance to push away enemies who attack it. And finally, Treant Protector grants the Shaman creature a healing and armor aura for nearby teammates. As you can see, Shamans also have a strong natural overlap with healers. It's rather unique in the sense that they summon a creature, but the strengths of this Shaman creature is based off what Shamans you have on the board. And for the next alliance, the Summoner Alliance, they just give a flat damage bonus to all summoned units. It doesn't even need to be the ones of this alliance. This includes summons from the Necronomicon, all the units that Anesek summons. Essentially, if it's not a hero unit, it's gonna benefit from the summoners. You can see how these two have natural overlap and synergy with one another. Now, for cons, both the shamans and summoners are easily countered by AoE. So, mages and a certain subset of AoE-centered heroes are pretty nasty to fight against. They also really don't like fighting Brawnies, because again, for every kill the Brawny gets, it just means that they're gonna be a much bigger problem later in the game. And as well, Quelling Blades and Maelstroms deal a lot of damage to summoned units. Now, moving on to the final alliance of this trio, the Savages. Savages add a stacking damage bonus every time they attack an enemy, with each threshold both increasing the damage per level and allowing all summons and eventually all units to apply this stacking damage. This allows Savages to be one of the go-to tank killer alliances, with the chances of you winning the round increasing the longer the round goes on. The reason that I put Savages towards the end is that out of the three of these, Savages is the one that could be played solo the most, meaning Savages can still be played without focusing on being a summoner-centric crew. It's still encouraged because the Savages like having a lot of units activating the alliance bonus, but you can get away with using this alliance despite not being a summoner-based build. Now, for the cons of Savages. Savages are countered by burst damage. So assassins, hunters, and mages. These alliances will typically burst you down before you get any meaningful stacks on your damage. Now, for tips, and this is for all of them. All of these alliances are very powerful when mixed together, but that doesn't mean that you can't make them work on their own. A lot of the individual members of the Summoner Alliance don't actually have overlaps with either Shamans or Savages. It's for that reason alone that Savages and Shamans can still be effective on a mixed alliance crew. You would think that that means you would always go for an Essex as your Underlord, but that's not necessarily true. All of the Underlords offer something that a Shaman, Summoner, or Savage crew might be lacking, whether that be giving them a frontline tank, shoring up the lack of burst damage, offering stuns, heals, and unique utility. Or, if you just really want to triple down on the summons, then sure, all Underlords are completely viable with this trio of alliances. As for items, all three of these guys like the same items for the most part. Necronomicon is great because that means even more summoned units. The Horn of the Alpha is very powerful since it meshes perfectly with all of them, and due to the fact that Shamans overlap with healers, that means they also like the same items as healers do. And Savages really like attack speed items. Now, for the standouts of each alliance. For the Shamans, we have Nature's Prophet, a tier 2 Shaman Summoner. His whole thing is that he summons trees, a shit ton of trees. Literally all he does is just spawning more and more of these godforsaken trees. At 3 stars, the trees that he summons will start spawning on the enemy backline, essentially turning them into assassin trees. And his Shaman effect, like I mentioned before, grants the Shaman creature the ability to cast this Burst of Lightning. It's actually the best burst damage option that Shamans have. For the Summoner Alliance, we have Meepo, a tier 2 rogue summoner. His spell, Poof, causes a small explosion, and whenever the spell is cast, a clone of Meepo is spawned. And these clones can also cast the spell Poof. And every time that they cast it, they make a clone of a clone. And this goes on forever. You can see how this can be very powerful. Give it enough time, Meepo can quite literally fill the entire board with clones of himself. Thing is, Meepo has 2 weaknesses. Number 1, the clones cannot use items, and if one clone dies, they all die. It's very unique, and it encourages you to place Meepo in smart locations where he won't get focused down. His 3-star effect allows the clones to use items, and depending on the item, they can be utterly ridiculous. Throw a Dagon on him and watch as red lightning explodes the enemy team. Add a refresher orb on him, and within seconds, you'll go from 1 Meepo to it's all Meepo now. Finally, you add the Horn of the Alpha on him, and each time a new Meepo spawns, that means a new Alpha dinosaur is also spawned. So even if the Meepo dies, that means you'll have a ton of dinosaurs that spawned in because of this item combination. He's honestly super powerful and really busted if used properly. And I don't have that much to say about the Savage standout. Spirit Breaker, a tier 2 Savage Brute, the Space Cow himself. He's a pretty durable frontliner that charges into enemy formations and messes up their positioning. He will always target the enemy furthest from him, making him a good backline destroyer and disruptor. His 3-star effect gives his auto attacks a chance to activate a Stunning Bash. Not much else to say, it's just more CC and damage for him. Moving away from those disgusting furries, we gotta talk about the Alliance, whose you'd think the name would imply that they counter them, but not really. Well, sort of. They just deal a lot of damage. Hunters! Hunters is a primary or a supporting alliance, with their pros being that they just deal a shit ton of damage. They also have a big overlap with the Vigilant alliance. This is the alliance that you pick when you really want to focus down enemies one by one. Their whole shtick is that, well, they have a chance to double or triple attack, pretty simple. As for the cons, it's pretty well stated. This is the definition of a glass cannon faction, as no one in the alliance is durable in any real sense. As for items, this is also another hackable alliance. So despite the thresholds of the alliance being somewhat unappealing, it's a lot easier to hit that max threshold. So you can pick a tank to shore up your lack of durability and help you reach that alliance threshold more, or you could put the hunter hat on another DPS unit like an assassin or swordsman as they shred the entire enemy team. There's a lot of ways to go about it. Other good items are the barriers and the dummies. The dummies are great for just distracting the enemy team, and the barriers or barricades can be used to turtle your team into a corner of the board, kinda like this, where they can safely take pot shots at the approaching team. Barriers will reduce all incoming ranged attacks, so if you're fighting another ranged base enemy crew, a barrier can help your rather squishy hunter team survive just a little bit longer. And as long as they're bunched up like this, it also ensures that assassins cannot jump the backline, as there's no space on the board for them to go to. As for other damaging items, Dragon Lance is a great item. The uncapped range is disgusting on certain hunters, and honestly, any of the damage items is just good on them in general. As for tips, be wary of positioning. It is both your greatest strength and your biggest weakness. Like I said, assassins can kill hunters really fast, so make sure that there's no space in the corner of your board to ensure that they can't get to you. As for Underlords, you're probably gonna either want to take Jewel to act as your tank, or Hogbin just to really funnel down the damage of your team. An Essex is also a really good unorthodox choice, especially if you get the damage amp version of her abilities. Because of how an Essex works, she summons a demon archer to attack on her behalf, and as long as your team is all bunched up in the corner of the board and an Essex is safely cradled in the middle, she will continuously spawn this demon archer to attack for her. And as long as no one on the enemy team can blitz through your team in any meaningful way, that means anytime that this demon archer is killed, she can just summon a new one, ensuring that your little turtle strategy will always have all the slots on your corner of the board filled. And for the standout unit, Wind Ranger, a tier 2 Vigilant Hunter. Not really much to say about her, she's just the most stereotypical ranged archer hunter unit I could think of. She just deals very high damage. She attacks fast and hits decently hard. Her spell deals very high damage. She just shoots a big arrow in a line, reaching across the entire board. It's best to put her in the corners of the board to maximize how many enemies can get hit by her ability. Her 3-star effect just ensures that she can cast her spell without being interrupted. And just because I brought it up already, Vigilance is a supporting alliance. While not specifically tied to the Hunter Alliance, they might as well be, since most of the units in this alliance are hunters. Vigilance will shift their focus on whichever enemy casted the spell last. gaining a damage bonus when attacking that marked enemy. Pros, they're very good against spell spammy heroes, so heroes with low mana costs and low spell cooldowns, specifically like Batrider, Bristleback, or Slardar. Vigilant can also counter certain alliances rather well. Mages, demons, and the healer alliance really get punished if you have strong Vigilant supporting your team. As for the cons, they actually sometimes lack focus fire damage, due to the alliance constantly shifting targets at times. Imagine you're fighting an enemy who has two heroes who spam their spells a lot on their opposite sides of the board. Every time one activates their spell, your units will have their attention and their damage divided between the two. Now add the fact that there's other enemies on the board, and you can see how this can become a problem. You might have a lot of damage spread across the enemy team, but never enough to kill the targets that you need to kill. The alliance has two thresholds, one at 2 members and one at 4. When fully maxed out at 4, all members of your crew become Vigilants. And this can actually sometimes lower your DPS, depending on your team's composition and the enemy team's composition. As for tips, like I mentioned before, massive overlap with Hunters. And because of just the nature of this alliance, it massively benefits ranged teams. Vigilance can also work with a Shaman or Summoner build pretty well. Due to the constant switching of targets, you might just want to leave this alliance at the first threshold. Of course, it really just depends on what the enemy teams are building. Max this alliance at your own discretion. And for the standout unit, Luna, a tier 2 Vigilant Knight. Her passive allows her attacks to bounce between multiple enemies, racking damage insanely quickly. She's actually one of the few knights who can deal a lot of damage even without items. You combine that with her Vigilant bonus, and her bounces shred clumped enemies really quick. Her 3-star effect gives her a spell that summons basically Moonbeam Artillery in the area around her, dealing a shit ton of damage. But don't let that Knight alliance deceive you. She may be a Knight, but she is not tanky whatsoever. So the Knight bonus is more like just an extra thing to have to maybe shrug off a hit or two, but don't expect her to frontline like the rest of the members of the Knight alliance. And due to the nature of just Hunters and Vigilants being the type to huddle in a corner and just deal damage from afar, this next alliance fits that category quite nicely as well. The Dweeb Alliance. Mages is a primary or supporting alliance. They love J.K. Rowling, and they live and die by their mana and their spells. Pros, probably has the highest DPS of any alliance. They also hold the record for the highest AoE damage in the game. As for cons, mages are like empaths for hunters. They too are glass cannons, but unlike hunters, they cannot sustain themselves, because at least with certain hunters, you can equip lifesteal items on them, allowing hunters to man-fight when enemies come up right to their face. Mages don't have the same luxury, so essentially, they're even more vulnerable than the other glass cannon factions. And it can be rather difficult to build up the alliance, as its power spike happens a lot later in the match, since a lot of the earlier tier mages don't really deal a lot of damage. Now, for items, anything that grants mana or mana regeneration is a must for a mage team. Octarine Essence or Refresher Orb is also really good on certain mages. Dagon, an item that could basically one-shot enemies before, will definitely one-shot enemies now if equipped on a mage build. And just like in the hunter section, dummies and barricades are also your friend here. As for tips, mages have big overlap with humans, and honestly, they're the only alliance that benefits from the mana regeneration that the human alliance gives. And just like the hunter alliance, I like Jewel to act as your tank, but Eno and Hogbin also benefit from the magic damage amplification. And that damage amplification happens for all units, not just mages, like say a 3-star Luna. And for the standout unit, we have Lich, a tier 1 fallen mage. On the surface, Lich is rather weak, especially as a mage. His spell is a defensive one with low damage, and his secondary alliance literally encourages him to die. It's his 3-star effect that really makes him shine. Chain Frost is a bouncing ball of ice magic that deals more and more damage the more times it bounces. This thing can destroy enemy teams so fast. And due to him being part fallen and a tier 1 unit, that means he is really easy to get, as you won't see a lot of people contesting liches in a game. So getting him to 3 stars is really easy. Do you want to commit a cardinal sin? Then do a full human build. Listen, I've played this game a lot, and I've managed to make every alliance and build work. All of them. From a full fallen build to a full brute build. I've tried to win games with using as few alliances as possible, possible. I've tried winning with all trolls, you name it. I have been able to find something that can make every alliance or team composition work, except humans, because the human alliance is the supporting alliance, nothing more. If you want to prove me wrong and get first place just using humans, please go ahead. Nerd. Pros, they give team mana. Cons, they only give team mana. And I'm not sure if you've noticed, mana is not that hard to get. Items, nothing. Decide your items on your other alliances. Not these guys. Please, Jesus. Tips, like I said, decent overlap with mages. And for the standout unit, Crystal Maiden, a tier 1 human mage. In the main Dota 2 video game, Crystal Maiden is the poster child for the ward bitch, the babysitter, the support of the entire team, the mana battery. And in this game, none of that has changed. She is, without a doubt, the squishiest unit in the game. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she's bad. In fact, she's actually really good. Her spell is sweet and simple. She roots an enemy in place, dealing decent damage, and the enemy cannot move. Her 3-star effect, however, is extremely good. As long as she stays alive, she gives her entire team cooldown reduction. That is not to be underestimated, especially on a mage team, but honestly, it can work on any team alliance or build-up, because across the board cooldown reduction is just broken, unlike this alliance. Now, I mentioned before that all alliances have thresholds, usually requiring at the very minimum 2 to hit the first threshold. But there are 3 alliances in this game that only require 1 threshold, or in other words, 1 unit for it to take effect. Of the 3 of them, I'll cover the simplest one first, the Magus. And I might as well just talk about it, Rubik, who is the only Magus unit in the game. Magus and Rubik are a supporting alliance and unit. Rubik himself is also a tier 4 mage. The Magus alliance basically ensures that Rubik, whenever his health drops below a certain point, puts him in this defensive stasis-like mode where nobody can attack him for a good amount of time. Now, Rubik's own basic ability is nothing amazing. It's just a bouncing bolt of energy that deals decent damage and lowers enemy damage a bit. It's good, it's straightforward, it's simple. But it's his second ability that's truly amazing, allowing him to copy enemy spells nearby and launching it straight back at them. This spell copying is instant and can easily win you the round depending on what units are on the enemy team. As far as I know, there's no cooldown for this, so as long as Rubik can remain alive and enemies are just activating spells around him, he will steal them. Everything from the weakest slow projectile to the strongest board covering crowd control spells you can think of. And because of the Magus bonus, this just allows Rubik to buy himself more time, allowing more enemies to come closer to him so he can copy their spells easier. Closing remarks for this alliance is build items that can help Rubik's survivability and make sure that he has some backup in the front line, because the range of his spell steal isn't the biggest. You have to put him in the front. Now, we go from the most boring mono-unit alliance in the game to the most interesting one, in my opinion, the Champion and Legion Commander. I'll just talk about them like they're one thing. The whole thing about Champions is that Legion Commander gains a damage and health bonus for every other alliance that you have active on the board. Not thresholds, just alliances. So, in other words, this encourages you to have as many alliances as humanely possible. And Legion Commander will also benefit and mimic every alliance on your team. So if you have hunters, Legion Commander also becomes a hunter. If there's assassins, she also becomes an assassin, albeit she doesn't contribute to the thresholds. Now, for pros, this is another snowball alliance. Legion Commander's spell is called Duel, and when it activates, it forces Legion Commander and her target to attack each other until one of them dies or the spell ends. The winner of the duel gains a permanent damage bonus for the rest of the game. It is absolutely essential for Legion Commander to win as many of these duels as possible. By the late game, assuming you've won a lot of these duels, her damage can become absolutely absurd. As for cons, Legion Commander herself has actually a very low base health and damage. This was done on purpose because of how the Champion Alliance works. Her health and bonus can quickly ramp up, but at the beginning, she's gonna be one of the weakest units, especially for her tier. And as well, if you lose any duels, remember, that damage is going to the enemy team and it's gonna stay there for the rest of the game, so make sure you don't lose those. those. Now, for items, Alliance hats are an absolute must for Legion Commander and the Champion Alliance. Normally, there's only a handful of ways you can go about building up your team, but these hats will ensure that you won't be railroaded into hiring specific units and alliances each and every single time, allowing your team build to be more flexible as a result. Items that also aid Legion Commander's ability to win duels is also extremely powerful and important. Damage items or blade mail are very powerful. Also, a shout out to the Refresher Orb. Putting this on Legion Commander and allowing her to potentially win 2 duels in a round? That's some strong shit, assuming you don't lose. Now, for tips. If you're going to be building a champion-based alliance, you're probably going to want to focus on getting more XP and levels as a result, because, more levels means more units, and more units means more alliances. Also, units that have 3 alliances are preferable, such as Omni Knight, Dazzle, or Queen of Pain. But of course, pick and choose which alliances are important. Having the choice between a healer human knight alliance or a demon and an assassin, that's one less alliance, but honestly, you benefit much more from the demon and assassin alliances. And speaking of demons, I'll get to them in a bit, always have one demon on your team with Legion Commander, because the demon buff massively helps her ability to win duels. Like I mentioned before, her champion bonus doesn't increase per alliance threshold, just the raw number of alliances. If you have the first threshold of knights, you don't need to put more units into getting the second or the third. Keeping it as 1 is good enough. You're probably going to want to prioritize the DPS alliances for Legion Commander, but you can still work with almost any build as long as you itemize and strategize accordingly. For the standout section, rather than bring up Legion Commander, since basically she is the champion alliance, I'm going to list heroes that blend a lot of alliances together that help benefit Legion herself. For example, Dazzle and Batrider grant an early troll alliance. You can also buy Bounty Hunter, but don't place them on the board yet. Then you get a Queen of Pain. At this point, you already have the troll bonus, champion bonus, and the demon bonus. Very, very good. Your Legion can already win a lot of duels by this point. Then you can pick up Omni Knight. By picking him up, it activates 3 alliances the moment you place him down on the board. That is a massive buff to Legion Commander. And then eventually, as you level up more and more, you can add both Alchemist and Bounty Hunter into the board. Alchemist and Bounty Hunter fill out the Rogue Alliance, and Alchemist also adds Poisoner Alliance. You add 1 more Assassin, and then you also get the Assassin bonus. And if you're also lucky, if you can pick up the Brute Hat, that's another alliance that you can take, since Alchemist is a Brute, meaning more damage and health for Legion Commander. Any more units past this point is honestly up to you. Like I said, you don't have to follow this build. You can still make her work with almost any variety of team composition. Hunters, Summoners, Knights, Spirits, they all work. So it's really just up to you and your build. The only last tip that I can give is try your best to get Legion Commander into a 2-star unit as soon as possible. Her 3-star effect just basically ensures that her duel lasts longer and is less likely to be interrupted. I really like this alliance. It's one of the most unique ones in the game. When you're winning, it feels great, but when you're losing, it feels like you're getting your teeth kicked in while you're already down on the ground. Like I said, it's a snowball alliance, so just be careful when you decide to use it. And since I emphasized it so much in the champion section, I might as well bring it up here. Demons is a supporting or a primary alliance. Despite the threshold only being 1, there are actually a lot of demons. They don't like each other, for the most part. Demons can be a powerful supporting alliance, but they can be played as a primary alliance if you can get it down just right. Pros: demons deal one of the highest damage in the game. The more demons you have on your team, the more damage there is. Even if there's only 1 demon on your team, the damage that they get from the demon buff from themselves is still substantial. And the damage is pure, meaning it cannot be reduced by armor or magic resistance in any way. For cons, due to the nature of the Demon Alliance, they can't really use their abilities cooperatively. It's one of the highest risk versus reward crew compositions in the game, assuming you are building all demons, because only 1 demon can cast a spell at a time. Anytime a demon casts a spell, every other member becomes silent and is unable to use their spells. Other than the beginning of the round, assuming you put your main demon in the front of your board, it is actually impossible to ensure which demon will cast their spell next. So it's very possible to have your 1-star tier 1 shadow demon cast a spell, robbing your 3-star Terrorblade from doing anything. Like I said, high risk, high reward. Items. This is also a hattable alliance. And there's basically 2 ways to go about putting this hat onto units. You could put the hat on a unit on your team that doesn't cast spells. Anti-Mage, Drow Ranger, Luna, and Lifestealer are good carriers for this demon hat since they themselves cannot cast spells other than some of their 3-star effects. So they aren't affected by the downsides of being silenced. Alternatively, you could put the demon hat on a unit who would benefit from the demon alliance. Let's say certain hunters, assassins, or knights could be very powerful with a demon buff. One thing you could do is place a Mask of Madness on one of the demons on your team. This ensures that they are silenced, meaning that they won't be clogging up the demon's spell priority line of who gets to cast their spell first. Alternatively, you can also put items like the Witless Shako to lessen their mana gain, ensuring that there's less competition for spellcasting rights on your team. Now, for tips. As a supporting alliance, there's no real downside. Much like real life, it's completely fine to have a few demons in your life, like the one I have in my closet. But if you are building a demon-focused team, make sure whoever you want as your main demon is in front, so that way they can deal damage quickly and receive it as well, ensuring that they cast their spell first. Whatever demon in front casts a spell gets the damage buff and goes to town on the enemy team. After that point, it is up to your team's positioning and honestly random chance as to who will get to cast a spell next. As for Underlords, well, any of them can work, but honestly, a Nesix is probably going to be the one you want to get. Like I've mentioned before, all of her summons counts as demons. That means the little demon archer she summons and her 2 ultimates also count as demons. So essentially, if you have her on a demon-centric team, she is adding 2 more demons to your crew. 2 demons that do not cast spells, and therefore won't be hogging up your demons' spellcasting real estate. Now, for the standout unit, we have Terrorblade, a tier 3 Hunter Fallen Demon. He starts in his weak melee form, with actually the lowest damage of anyone in the Hunter Alliance. But the moment his mana reaches 100%, he will literally swap health bars with the ally furthest away from danger. So let's say if you had a Crystal Maiden hiding in the back and Terrorblade's getting his ass kicked up in front, he literally rips out his health bar, gives it to her, and takes her health bar. I'm not talking about HP numbers, I'm talking about percentages. Basically granting his full health again and transforming into a ranged super demon. And in this ranged demon form, he went from having low damage to the highest base damage of any hunter. Combined with his demon buff, well, watch as he waves his hands around like Dr. Manhattan and atomizes the entire enemy team. So be careful with how you position your crew. Terrorblade needs to swap health with someone on your team, but you don't want him accidentally swapping health with, let's say, your tank. He will always do it to the units furthest from him, so keep positioning in mind. He also starts off as a melee unit, so if you decide to do the thing of hunters hugging a corner, do not place him in that corner, because units cannot pass through each other, and if he's stuck in a corner, that means he can't gain mana, and he can't attack, so you have to put him in front. And while he does deal a lot of damage, he himself, even in his powered up mode, is not particularly durable. So make sure that he has support in the front lines. Yes, he may be a hunter, but honestly, Terrorblade works best in a mixed alliance crew, with a good balance of backline and frontline units. Whew, I've been saying a lot of words lately, so this next alliance, thankfully, I don't have much to say. Dragon. These nuts across here. This is the Utility Support Alliance. It does nothing other than grant its members new abilities. I won't go into too much detail about this, it's very small. You need 2 dragon, these nuts, on your team to activate the bonus, and all dragons will then gain a new ability. Snapfire gets Lava Artillery, Huck can Thanos snap itself out of existence for a split second, avoiding damage, Viper coats himself in Cancer, and anyone who attacks him is poisoned and slowed, and Dragonite becomes a dragon instead of a puny human, despite his name. Way to go. Oh, right. Legion Commander can also piggyback off this alliance, healing for 50% of her health anytime she wins a duel. Dragging these nuts across your face. Keeping on theme with supporting alliances, next up is one of my favorite supporting alliances, Trolls. They like feet. Not really. Pros. One of the most common supporting alliances. It's a good overall buff to any team, regardless of your composition. And its units have strong synergies with an assortment of alliances alliances. Cons. Due to how the units in the alliance is distributed, getting the full troll bonus is actually rather hard, since the last unit required is a tier 5, and tier 5 units are very hard to get. And as well, despite their bonus being technically a DPS buff, trolls themselves don't deal that much damage. Now, for items. Trolls benefit from proc-based items very well, or honestly anything that adds DPS to your team. All trolls are ranged, so the Dragon Lance is also really great. For example, putting that on a Batrider is very powerful. Those proc-based items being Maelstrom, Skull Basher, Diffusal Blade, and so on. As for tips, these guys are very strong in the early game, and it needs to be emphasized, they give everyone attack speed bonuses, sure, but trolls gain double that bonus. So meaning, if you fully dedicate your team into an early game all troll build, it can be absurdly powerful. 2-star Batriders can shred entire enemy teams from the early to mid game. And speaking of Batrider, he is also the standout unit. Batrider is a tier 1 troll knight. He has the best damage in the troll alliance. Well, technically that would be Troll Warlord, but no, he's a tier 5. They kind of don't exist. Look at the percentage to get tier 5s. Are you kidding me? His spell is a low cooldown, low mana cost, slow and damage amplification for all his damage sources. In other words, he coats his enemies in that sticky, gooey, and he deals more damage to those coated in it. His damage is good, but not the best. And despite being a knight, he is not meant for frontlining, kind of like Luna before. Having the knight bonus is nice to have on the side, allowing him to shrug off a hit or two, but he is not tanky. And as mentioned before, he is heavily countered by Vigilance. Anytime that he activates his spell means he is receiving the full bombardment of the Vigilant Alliance. Oh, and I forgot to mention, because Batrider is a knight and Dazzle is also a healer, that means picking up an Omni Knight basically grants your entire team a lot of bang for your buck. Trolls, as a whole, also have strong overlap with knights and healers. Now, I'll just keep talking about these supporting alliances, fuck it. Poisoners is a supporting alliance. Many call this alliance a meme. My friends call this alliance a meme. But you know what I have to say about that? Well, pros. They are a very powerful early game DPS and soft crowd control alliance. They can gimp many early game builds due to the slow alone. It's not stated anywhere, but poison deals 20 damage a second. So combine that with the slow it grants means that it's pretty strong in the early game. Now, for the cons. This is one of the fastest alliances to fall off, offering next to nothing in the middle and late game. So make sure that you have some other primary alliances waiting for you by the mid game point. Items. Attack speed items allow for more stacks of poison to be placed faster. So early game attack speed sources would be like Gloves of Haste. I think that's it. I don't think there's any other tier 1 or tier 2 item that gives attack speed. Oh boy. Standout, we have Venomancer, a tier 1 scaled summoner poisoner. Honestly, Venomancer himself has enough poison built into his kit that you don't even need the Poisoner Alliance. He summons these little plague wards that act like poison turrets. Their damage is rather low, but each of these wards can apply 1 stack of poison, and the spell has a really low cooldown. His 3-star effect just makes these wards even more durable than they were before, becoming immune to magic. So with enough of these little plague wards, Venomancer can saturate the entire board with cancer. Now for this next one, we have the Fallen, a supporting or primary alliance, but don't let anyone know that I said that. Full disclaimer, this is one of the hardest alliances to make work. It is meant to be a supporting alliance, and it's also very underwhelming, if I'm being completely honest. And it's not very strong. How it works is that members of this alliance actually have to die to help the remaining members of your team. So by itself, the alliance isn't helping your team until you lose a unit, and that's not good. You'd think that sacrificing your unit would grant you with a big bonus or benefit, but honestly, what you get for sacrificing a unit is not that much. These numbers are not that impressive. You're gonna lose a lot with this alliance, but if you can make it to the late game and completely max out this alliance, you're gonna become a monster, basically guaranteeing victory. Or more likely, you'll just lose until, well, you lose. Wow. Pros. One of the best late game alliances out there. Like I said, it can almost guarantee a win. Almost. And many of the units in this alliance are actually very strong on their own right. Terrorblade is actually a member of this alliance. And this alliance also has decent overlap with the Heartless alliance. As for cons, the threshold of this alliance makes it very difficult to max out. And as well, how the units are distributed is also very difficult. One of its units is a tier 4 unit and the last one is a tier 5 unit. That is very hard to make work. So until you have this alliance maxed out, the first threshold bonuses are very underwhelming. Like I mentioned before, your team has to die for it to work. As for items, I guess you could build healing amplification items or maybe damage items. You can put that on the Terrorblade and have one of the weaker members of the Alliance die on purpose for Terrorblade to get the buff, but honestly, it's not that good. Don't do that. There's honestly no good items. For the standout unit, we have Vengeful Spirit, a tier 1 Heartless Fallen, a rather undervalued unit due to her 2 alliances not being particularly popular. But Vengeful Spirit herself is a very powerful unit to have in any crew. Her basic ability is a damaging wave that lowers enemy armor. This synergizes well with the Fallen alliance bonus. Her 3-star effect causes her to explode on death. It's perfectly viable to place her in front of your team, letting her cast her spell, and then when she dies and buffs her team, her death will ensure that your team gets a good buff and the enemy team gets a huge chunk of damage. And if you have the full Fallen bonus, you get those things twice. I'll add this extra segment for this alliance at the end. The reason that it's so strong at the end is because once the alliance is maxed out, all of your units basically have a second life. They die, applying the Fallen buff, and then they come back. And by that point, you've already reached the late game, and your units are already going to be monsters in their own right. A lot of people don't like buying Fallen units, so that means getting 2-star and 3 stars in this alliance is not particularly hard. And the 5-star unit, Wraith King, is a monster to have. So essentially, if you can survive to get to the late game and max out this alliance, you are basically assured to win. And just because they're closely related together, the Heartless is a supporting alliance, though you could play it as a primary if you're bold enough. Now, if I'm being completely honest, this one is also an underwhelming alliance. Minus armor is good on paper, but as I'll explain shortly, you'll see why this alliance seems to have problems and can't really truly benefit from its powerful alliance bonus. Now, for pros, minus armor is always good to have, as sources of minus armor in the game are actually rather rare. So even having just 1 threshold or even 2 thresholds of it is honestly good enough to have. And as well, most of the units within this alliance are actually very strong individually. Now for the cons. Most members of this alliance have anti-synergy with minus armor, because the majority of the members within the Heartless Alliance don't rely on physical damage. Most of them are spellcasters. Only 2 members truly benefit from it, that being Drow Ranger and Lifestealer. Everyone else relies on spells, and spells don't benefit from minusing the enemy armor. Now, for items. If you really want to double down on the minus armor, Desolator is about the only item you can buy that can help aid in this endeavor. All of these sources of minus armor stack completely together, and it's very powerful if done right. And to help ensure that, I got a little tip for you. You can pick up Slardar, the Scaled Warrior. Despite not being a Heartless member himself, his ability causes the enemy armor to lower even further. It'll get so low to the point that they might as well be taking double or even triple damage from your basic attacks. So if you're trying to funnel down an anti-armor build, picking up a Slardar is a pretty good choice. Now, for the standout unit, we have Pudge, a tier 2 Heartless warrior. His spell is incredible, Meat Hook. It's also a great way to counter corner-hugging crews. He yoinks the furthest enemy away from himself and brings them right into the middle of your crew. He basically counters turtling enemy teams. His 3-star effect causes him to gain a ton of health every time an enemy unit dies around him. Think of it as the Brawny Alliance, however it only lasts for the round. However, it's 500 health per enemy. That is a ton of health. He also gets bigger for every enemy death. This motherfucker can become so big, you literally cannot see anything on the board anymore if he gets big enough. You slap a Blade Mail, Heart of Tarask, or a Radiance on him, and watch as he proceeds to kill everything just by staying alive. Do you want to know if I'm dyslexic or not? I've written this word as either rogue or rouge so many times in this stupid script. Anyway, rogues are a support or a primary alliance. They are also my second favorite alliance in this game. They're pretty easy and straightforward to use, but I enjoy using them. These guys will dodge attacks and gain a damage buff every time they do so. It is very funny watching enemies constantly miss and then getting blown up immediately afterwards. Pros: Evasion makes this alliance very good at beating physical damage lineups, such as hunters, assassins, knights, warriors, swordsmen, etc. And the damage that this alliance is substantial, since all of their members are head-to-head fighters and skirmishers. So these guys are pretty beefy on their own right and can deal a lot of damage, regardless of the rogue bonus. Now, for cons, this does nothing against magic and spells. They can still get blown up very easily, just like any other alliance can against mages or spellcasters. And they're also countered by one specific item, the Monkey King Bar. This one item alone nullifies this entire alliance completely. And finally, sometimes evasion just isn't enough. And even against a physical enemy lineup, sometimes they can just eventually overpower a rogue alliance, because you can only get away with evading attacks so many times, because the few attacks that do slip in will do a number on your units, assuming you don't have anything else to back up your rogues. Now, for items, anything with evasion is great, since evasion from items still counts towards the alliance bonus. So that would be the butterfly, halberd, or the talisman of evasion. As for tips, be aware that this is a 4 threshold alliance, and while it can carry you to victory, you should be probably using it as a support alliance most of the time. Also, Phantom Assassin, a tier 1 assassin swordsman, her 3-star effect means that she gains a rogue alliance bonus if any is available. It's just something nice to have if you're already building rogues on the side, as Phantom Assassin herself can deal a lot of damage, and being a rogue on top of that is just icing on the cake. All Underlords are viable with rogues, however, I do have a penchant towards Jewel and Enno, but again, all of them can work. Depends on the situation. Now, for the standout unit, Bounty Hunter, a tier 1 rogue assassin. He deals very high damage from both his spells and normal attacks, not counting the fact that he is also an assassin. He's tier 1, but don't let that deceive you, his damage is very high. But what makes him truly great is his 3-star effect. For every kill that Bounty Hunter gets, that's 1 bonus gold at the end of the round. Combined with his high damage, it is very possible for Bounty Hunter to get 3, 4, or more kills during that entire round. That is a lot of gold every time that you have a fight. He essentially ensures that gold will cease becoming a problem for you, and you can reroll to your heart's content. Not really. Practice moderation, kids. Please, holy shit. I've bankrupted myself so many goddamn times doing that. And last but definitely not least, we have the Spirits, a primary or supporting alliance, and honestly, one of my favorites as well. Do you like triangles? Then oh boy, do I have the alliance for you. Also, one of the most unique alliances and mechanics in this game. So essentially, any member of the Spirit Alliance gets a spotlight on them whenever they cast a spell. And when there's at least 3 spotlights active, they will form what I like to call a danger triangle, dealing damage and secondary effects based on the units that activated the triangle. Yes, I know Spotlight and Danger Triangle is not the in-game name, but I'm gonna call them that because it's easier to understand. The 3 units get the Spotlight, they activate, the triangle pulses 3 times, dealing damage, and as long as these units can stay alive, the triangle technique will keep happening over and over again. Now, for pros, they can deal insane area damage. They can cover almost the entire board. And if you have enough spirits active on your team, you can guarantee almost 100% uptime on the triangle. And the secondary effects of this triangle can be used to counter certain enemies via the secondary effects, anywhere from silences to disarms to breaking of passives. Now, for cons, this alliance is hard countered by mana burn, silences, and honestly any hard CC. If your units can't cast spells, there's gonna be no triangles. And sometimes the angle and positioning of the triangle just means that few or no enemies can be hit. Honestly, it just really depends on how the spirits decide to position themselves. You can get a very wide triangle or a very shallow triangle. And finally, this build cannot work unless there are 3 spirits active. If one of your spirits die at the beginning of the round, this alliance offers you nothing because they cannot activate this danger triangle without a 3rd member. So, for items, anything that gives mana, or survivability items. Anything that helps your spirits stay alive and cast spells longer. Now, for tips, it is completely viable to have spirits as your solo alliance. alliance. You can also have them as your supporting alliance. It's completely viable, but note the spirit damage won't be as high if you decide to add them into a mixed alliance. Their danger triangle has a ton of damage, and thus if you decide to make it your primary alliance, having more spirits on the board is preferable over having a few strong spirits. So sometimes, depending on the game, it's actually preferable to have 2 2-star storm spirits over just 1 3-star storm spirit, as those 2 2-stars can help activate the triangle. Now each of these spirits have a different secondary debuff on the triangle, ranging from silencing, disarming, burn damage, breaking of passives, etc. Each of the spirit's secondary effects is listed here. Spirits don't necessarily have any real overlap with any alliance. However, I've noticed that they work well with either mages, since the mage alliance helps benefit the triangle damage, or frontline builds such as knights or warriors, just because they act as a good distraction when the spirits go to town with their triangle damage. Now for the standout unit, we have Storm Spirit, a tier 2 mage spirit. One of the most slippery and hard to lock down units in the game. He can deal very high damage thanks to his spell, which also has an incredibly low cooldown. Ball lightning causes him to zip around the map, dealing damage to any enemy he passes through. And his 3-star effect just increases the DPS that he can do. But quite honestly, what makes him amazing is the low cooldown of his spell. Remember, as long as he can keep activating it, he'll get that spirit spotlight. This is why having 2 2-star storm spirits is so potent and powerful. You only need another spirit, and the uptime on the danger triangle is basically guaranteed. He is countered by mana burn and silence, but honestly, given how strong he is, that seems like a worthy compromise. And just like that, we're done. Holy crap. I did not realize how much effort this would take just to cover each alliance. This video was originally only supposed to be 20 or 30 minutes long, but well, you can see the runtime. It kind of expanded, if you ask me. Apologies for this video taking so long, but you see, one of the reasons why it took so long was I was playing Dota Underlords while editing these videos. Sorry. Anyway, I don't know how to end this. Thanks for watching, Internet Wanderer. Do the cat. Sorry, I have a cat now, and she's going crazy inside a box that I have in the living room. Thanks for watching, Internet Wanderer. Do the YouTube things.